After completing my last overview video on weapons, I decided that enemies would be a good area to look at next. While weapon descriptions give at least some guidance to the player as to their abilities and traits, enemy descriptions are much more obtuse and tell you very little. Like before, I'm making this video with a concentration on the Tower of Sisyphus. That means that some enemies from the base game won't be discussed here, as they never appear in the tower. This also means that I won't be discussing any of the base game bosses, as none of those show up either. Similar to the weapons video, I learned quite a bit during the process of gathering data. If there's anything you notice that I left off, feel free to point it out. I was pretty exhaustive in my testing, but I'm sure there are still some things that I never ended up noticing. I want to lay out what to expect for the rest of the video. There are probably more enemies in Returnal than most people think, even when only looking at the tower. I'm going to cover 38 enemies in total, plus an additional section at the end to cover the tower's boss, Algos. Some of these enemies will share more similarities than others. I'll generally speak about these enemies in sections, but I'll still dedicate some time to each enemy individually. For each enemy, I'm going to discuss how many points they award, how much health they have, how much damage shooting their weak point does, assuming that they have one, what attacks they have, plus the damage that they do, and any unique traits or behaviors that I discovered for the enemy. When mentioning points, I'm going to divide enemies into tiers, which will determine how many points they award. There'll be 4 different tiers of points enemies can fall into, each awarding more than the last. Within these tiers, the amount of points you get will be determined by how you kill the enemy. Defeating an enemy normally with a weapon or alt fire will award the least amount of points. Killing them with a hit to the weak point will award 500 more points. Note that this category is only applicable if an enemy has a weak point. I didn't list any points in this category for tier 4, as there's only one enemy that belongs here, and it doesn't have a weak point. Defeating an enemy with a melee kill will award 1500 more points than the base, while defeating them with a melee while Celine is still in the air will award the most points, granting 2250 points more than the base. You'll notice that, especially for enemies in the first tier, you're going to want to kill them with aerial melee kills as much as possible. Doing this, versus just shooting them down normally, will award 10 times the number of points. In the tower, you'll build up a multiplier as long as you continue going up floors and defeating enemies. The multiplier will go up to 100 when it's maxed out. Any points you see on this chart would be affected by the multiplier. So killing a tier 4 enemy with an aerial kill can net you as many as 375,000 points, assuming your multiplier is maxed out. Points awarded by defeating Algos works differently, and isn't part of any of these tiers. I'll discuss this more at the end of the video when I specifically cover Algos. Since I'll also be discussing enemy health and enemy attack damage, I'll need to explain how enemy levels work. In the tower, all enemies are assigned a level, which you can see next to the health bar when you're fighting them. This will start at 1 at the beginning of the tower. For the first 2 phases of the tower, enemies will increase 1 level for every 10 floors, which is the same as twice per phase. Once you reach phase 3, they'll start to level up every 5 floors, which is the same as 4 times per phase. This is the rate that they'll continue to level up for the rest of the run. Enemy levels only affect how much health they have and how much damage their attacks do. When I discuss enemies, I'll mention the base values as well as how much it increases per level. With the exception of Algos, the base health and attack damage I discuss will be from a level 1 enemy. Health increases at a different rate depending on the enemy, which I'll point out as I go through them. Enemy damage is even more specific, as different attacks on the same enemy will do different damage and increase at different rates. When I do discuss enemy damage and the increase per level, this will always be under the assumption that Celine's protection stat is still at 0. If you have extra protection, then the damage you take will obviously be less than what I say in the video. Unfortunately, I don't really understand how the calculation for protection works. My first thought was that you could divide the damage that you would normally take by 1 plus your protection stat, so having 100% protection under this would half your damage. This isn't how it works, as 100% protection would actually reduce damage by much more than that. My second assumption was that protection would reduce the damage you take by the protection percentage, so in that case, 100% protection would completely nullify any damage. This is closer to the truth than the first scenario, but it isn't completely accurate either. From what I can tell, no amount of protection will completely reduce damage to 0. However the developers programmed this, I can understand them not wanting to make protection too broken. It did, however, force me to take a bunch of hits at 0 protection just so I could know how much damage things did. I couldn't risk increasing my protection, as it would throw off my calculation. Anyway, the more important number to pay attention to is how much the health or damage increases per level. This will end up mattering much more than the base amounts, especially as you get to higher tower levels with higher level enemies. Before moving on, I want to throw out that any damage or health values I discuss comes with an about in front of it. If I say something does 10 damage, I mean it does about 10 damage. I don't say this because my testing wasn't thorough. I say this because health and damage actually has decimals in Returnal. For example, if it looks like you took 10 damage from an attack, you may have actually taken 9.5, with the decimal simply not showing. This is also true for enemy health. Because decimals are hidden from the player, it's hard to know the exact amount of health that enemies have. You can assume anything I say in this video is very close to the correct value. It might just be slightly off due to rounding and how I had to calculate values down to level 1. Anyway, I don't want to have to say about hundreds of times, so just leave a small margin for any values I discuss. Finally, Selene's health is displayed as a percent. At the start of a run, your max health is 100%. This can go up to 300% if you continue upgrading it and collecting resin. Any attack damage I discuss can just be subtracted from your current health. You don't need to worry about the percent sign, as it's really just there for show. So if I say something does 6 damage, I mean it would reduce your health from 100 to 94, or 300 to 294. I won't refer to damage values as percent, I'm just going to refer to them as flat numbers, as it's easier that way. With that, let's get into enemy specifics. There are 5 types of turrets that you can run into during the tower. Besides their attacks, they have very similar specs. All 5 have 138 health at level 1, which increases by 26 per level. All turrets have a chance to spawn with a shield around them, blocking most attacks. Attacking a turret will only ever deal damage to its health, you can't stagger them. It's also one of the enemy types that die to a single melee hit, regardless of how high their level is. All turrets have a weak point located at the top, which is where their shots come from. Shooting them here will deal 2.6 times the normal damage, with only one exception which I'll mention specifically when I cover that turret. All 5 of them belong to the second tier points, awarding 500 to 2750 points depending on how you kill them. Turrets can't overlap their attacks. There are some enemies in the game which won't duplicate the same attack against you at the same time. Since each turret only has one type of attack, and since all turrets on a single floor are always the same, you can safely assume other turrets are not readying an attack as long as you can see one already. As I said earlier, turrets are pretty much only differentiated by what attacks they do, so the specifics should go by quickly. Before firing, the Atropian turret will glow red. Afterwards, it'll fire off a cluster of bullets. It'll do this for 3 volleys before pausing and starting the process over. If hit, Selene will take 7 damage, with each level increasing the damage by an additional 3. The Crimson turret fires in a machine gun-like pattern. When hit, Selene will take 13.5 damage, with this increasing by 7 per level. This is also the one turret whose weak point functions differently than all the others. While most turrets take 2.6 times the damage for hitting their weak point, the Crimson turret takes 1.5 instead. It seems odd that this one turret should be different, but my testing was consistent, so it is what it is. The Citadel turret is hands down the most annoying turret for me to deal with. When firing, it will lob a red ball. When this makes contact with the surface, the ball will transform into a circular wave and spread outward. The wave itself can pass through surfaces like walls or pillars, so be careful if you're taking cover. Whether you're hit by the ball or the resulting wave, the damage will be the same. You'll take 11.5 damage when hit, increasing by 12 per level. Of all the turrets, this is the highest increase per level. You'll want to be careful when you find this turret at higher tower floors. If your protection isn't high enough, a single hit can reduce your health by quite a lot. When readying its attack, the echoing turret will show a small tracker beam before firing the actual beam. If you're hit by this, you'll take 10.5 damage, which will go up by 5 each level. The Frost turret lobs 3 orbs through the air, which then stick to the ground and create an ice zone, which slows your movement. The telegraph for the attack is now a blue light, as opposed to the other turrets, which glow red. Damage to Selene is the same whether you're hit by the orb directly or caught in the explosion. You'll take 6 damage, increasing by 9 per level. Note that the zone of ice on the floor itself doesn't deal any damage, it's only the explosion which will hurt you. I decided to make this group of enemies as they have a few shared characteristics. While they have wildly different appearances, behaviors, and attacks, they do have the same health as one another, and award the same amount of points if you kill them. All enemies in this category start with 48 health, and increase by 19 per level. Besides 2 non-hostile enemies which I'll cover in a later category, this is by far the lowest health and health growth you'll come across in the tower. Just like with turrets, these enemies will die to a single melee hit. After this section, enemies will no longer die in one melee swing. They'll instead just take normal melee damage, which is 60, or 180 if you hit them when they're staggered. All enemies in this section belong to the lowest tier of points. Note that only one enemy in this entire section has a weak point, which I'll cover when I get to it. This means that only one enemy can award the 750 point category in this tier, as it's the only one that has a weak point to exploit. Besides the first enemy in this category, enemies can't overlap the same attack, similar to how the turret works. Keep in mind that almost every enemy besides turrets will have more than one attack. So while they can't overlap the same attack, enemies and groups can still ready all their different types of attacks simultaneously, so long as they have others to choose from. You won't really see the Kerberon much, as it only appears in the first two phases of the tower. Once you get to phase 3, the enemy will stop showing up. This is the one enemy in the category that can overlap his attacks. Don't assume that other Kerberon off-screen are not about to attack you just because you see one doing so in front of you. If Selene is above or below where the Kerberon is, they'll often pursue you by jumping to where you are. Kerberon have two different ways it can attack you. The first will start with its mouth glowing blue as it reels its head back. It'll then fire a small barrage of shots. This deals 9.5 damage and increases by 3 per level. If you get close to the Kerberon, it'll crouch down a bit and lunge in to bite you. This attack deals 8 damage plus 3 per level. The tripod has two modes of offense. The first is where it walks around launching basic attacks at you. First of these attacks is where its turret arm will glow orange and it will shoot a small spread of bullets. If this hits, you'll take 7.5 damage, increasing by 8 per level. If you get close to it, it'll raise up one of its legs and try to stomp Selene. This attack comes out quickly and can be hard to react to, so it's best not to get too close to them unless you're closing in for a melee kill. If hit, you'll take 16.5 damage, increasing by another 16.5 per level. This is actually rather a lot of damage, especially for this category. All the more reason not to stay too close to one for too long. When you first encounter a group of tripods, some of them will take the time to stop moving and form a shield around them. They'll be surrounded by a red light for a few seconds until the shield is formed. When in this form, it can no longer use its other two attacks. Instead, its turret arm will glow orange and a tracking beam will show up. After a few moments, it will fire a real beam, which will deal 8 damage when it hits you, plus an additional 8 per level. Be aware that tripods will make the decision to either walk around or become stationary at the start of an encounter. If a tripod starts walking around at the start of a fight, it will remain doing so for the entire fight. Similarly, if a tripod becomes stationary and forms a shield, it will not decide to walk around partway through the fight. Lamiodon is one of the most basic non-turret enemies in the game. It does act more evasively than other enemies, often moving sideways and quickly shifting out of the way of your attacks. It only has a single attack where it spreads its wings and glows orange before lunging in for a melee strike. This will deal 13.5 damage, increasing by 4.5 per level. Gyropods are the only enemy in this category that have a weak point. These are the two jetpack-like items located on their backs. It's hard to get to these, as the enemy tends to face towards Selene. Instead, if you stagger the gyropod, it will then turn around to reveal its back for an easier hit. Shooting this weak point will deal 10 times your normal damage. This is one of the highest weak point multipliers in the game. Unfortunately, you're not likely to use it as you'll probably just want to melee kill them instead. Besides, as I mentioned before, enemies in this category don't have a lot of HP. For attacks, the gyropod has two options. First, it can glow blue before shooting a stream of bullets straight at Selene. This does 8.5 damage and increases by 3.5 per level. For its second attack, the gyropod will glow red while turning slightly to the side. It will then start to launch a barrage of bullets while turning to the side to increase the spread of the attack. It's important to note that once the gyropod starts to glow red, the area that it will fire on has already been decided. It will no longer track Selene until the attack finishes. You'll want to be sure to move out of the area in front of the gyropod, especially since this attack deals much more damage than the first one. When hit, you'll take 16 damage, increasing by 7 per level. The Strixia has two attacks. For the first, it will glow blue before firing 2 streams of bullets, which will go around where Selene is currently positioned. The attack lasts quite a long time, so the screen can get filled with lots of bullets if the attack goes for the entire duration. While it would normally miss you if you're standing still, you're likely to be moving a lot, so try not to run into these shots. When hit, this deals 9.5 damage and increases by 3.5 per level. The second attack has a Strixia glowing orange while a tracker beam locks onto Selene. It will remain like this for quite a long time before firing off a very fast moving beam. While charging, the tracker beam usually does a very good job of staying on Selene. There's a small opportunity to dodge out of the way right before the damaging beam comes out. Otherwise, the speed of the attack makes it so you'll probably take damage if the tracker beam is still on you once the damaging beam shows up. When hit, Celine will take 13.5 damage, increasing by 4.5 each level. One useful thing to know is that the Strixia will be staggered by almost any attack. As both its attacks can be pretty annoying to deal with, quickly shooting one during or prior to it launching its attack can be a good way to stop the pressure. As far as I can tell, this enemy looks identical to the basic Strixia, but its attacks are completely changed. Additionally, it's much harder to stagger the enemy, meaning you can't just stun it with your weakest shots. The first attack has a Proto-Strixia glow blue before firing a beam below where it's flying. It will then raise the angle, causing the beam to travel along the ground in a straight line. The attack deals 5.5 damage, increasing by 2.5 per level. This is one of the least damaging attacks in the game, as it has neither high base damage nor damage growth. The second attack is more annoying and makes this enemy much harder to deal with than the basic Strixia. The Proto-Strixia will glow red and lob a shot in the air, which turns into a red circular wave upon contact with any surface. This functions just like the Citadel turret's attack, even in the way it pierces through surfaces. This is more annoying to deal with on the Proto-Strixia, however, as it flies through the air and isn't locked to a single location. Whether you're hit directly by the shot or the resulting red wave, you'll take 13 damage plus 5 per level. Aethervact are the most annoying flyers to try and get melee kills against, as they tend to fly much higher than all other airborne enemies in this category. Its first attack has the enemy glow blue prior to firing off a cluster of shots. These shots form a rectangular pattern and move in a straight line as they spread out, covering a wide area. It will deal 10 damage, increasing by 6.5 per level. The other attack has the Aethervact glow orange before shooting 3 beams below where it's flying. When hit, Celine will take 8.5 damage, increasing by 5 for each level. The drone has 3 possible attacks. The first has a glow red before releasing a barrage of missiles. These missiles will linger in the air for a moment before attempting to home in on Celine. The missiles aren't super accurate, but the number of them makes it likely you'll get hit if you don't dodge out of the way. They deal 5 damage, increasing by 7 per level. The next attack has the drone forming a red ring around itself before releasing a surface-piercing wave. The wave deals 13 damage, plus 11 per level. The last attack has a chance of activating once the drone has taken a significant amount of damage. The telegraph starts the same as the missile barrage in that it will glow red. The drone will then start to barrel roll towards Celine in an attempt to crash into her, destroying itself in the process. This attack deals damage if it crashes on or near Celine. If hit, you'll take 7 damage, increasing by an additional 7 per level. Note that this last attack won't count as a kill if it ends up destroying itself. You won't get any points, so it's best to destroy it yourself if you're able. Unlike the Strixia and Proto-Strixia enemies, you can tell the 2 drone types apart visually. While the basic drone always looks partially broken, the Frost drone looks to be in good condition and doesn't have any pieces that look damaged or missing. The first attack functions the same as the drone. It will glow red and fire a missile barrage. This version of the attack, however, does more damage. It starts at 7 and increases by 10 per level. The next attack also has a Frost drone glow red, but the size of the light around the enemy is much larger than with the missile barrage. The Frost drone will fire a red beam at the ground. After a few moments, red waves will appear from the beam's point of contact and spread outwards, piercing surfaces. The Frost drone will continue firing the beam and causing red waves to be produced until it breaks line of sight with the player. This attack deals damage differently depending on whether you're hit by the beam itself or the wave it produces. The beam will deal 2 damage, increasing by 8 per level, while the wave will deal 4 damage, increasing by 9 per level. The last attack is once again a self-destruct. The telegraph is slightly different in that it will glow purple as opposed to the drone's red. The damage starts the same as the drone, coming in at 7, but increases by 9 per level instead. Again, you won't get any points if the Frost drone destroys itself. From here on out, there are no enemies that die to a single melee hit. Enemies in the remaining categories also tend to have more complex movesets, as well as considerably more health and damage. Enemy point tiers and health are not consistent across the category, so I'll instead mention these values for each enemy. The Kerberonix is a tougher and larger form of the Kerberon. There are 3 types of Kerberonix, which all share a few qualities. All of them belong to the second tier points and start at 138 health, increasing by 59 per level. It's possible to stagger Kerberonix type enemies, which results in them falling on their sides, revealing a weak point on their belly. If shot here, they'll take double the damage. Like the Kerberon, they'll jump to where Selene is if there's a height difference between you. The basic variant of the Kerberonix is colored orange, and it has the possibility of showing up with a shield, much like turrets do. The Kerberonix only gets 2 attacks, which are very similar to the smaller Kerberon enemies. The first one has their mouth glow orange as they throw their head back. They'll then launch a steady stream of bullets towards you that lasts for quite a while. If it hits, this will deal 14.5 damage, increasing by 6 for each level. The other attack has them crouching down a bit before lunging in for a bite. This deals 17 damage and increases by 7 for each level. The Waste Kerberonix appears blue. This variant never shows up with a shield, making it easier to deal with from a distance. The first attack has its mouth light up blue while throwing its head back, just like with the basic Kerberonix. This time, the attack is a single shotgun-like burst of bullets. This deals 11.5 damage and increases by 6 per level. The second attack functions the same as the Kerberonix's bite attack, with the same animation. This time, it will deal 20 damage and increase by 10 per level. This variant of the Kerberonix gets a third attack. If you stagger them and allow it to get back up, a red ring will start to form around the Waste Kerberonix. Once it stands fully back up, the ring will turn into a wave, which expands outwards and pierces through surfaces. This deals 11 damage and increases by 5 each level. The Frost Kerberonix appears purple and once again has the possibility of showing up with a shield. The first attack has a similar telegraph as the others in that their mouth will glow orange and they will throw their head back. A tracker beam will also show up and lock onto Selene. Once fired, a beam will shoot out. If hit, Selene will take 9 damage, which increases by 14 per level. The Frost Kerberonix's second attack is actually not a bite this time. Approaching the enemy will cause a purple ring to form around them. After a few moments, the enemy will release purple waves which expand outwards and pierce through surfaces. Unlike other red surface piercing attacks, purple waves can't be dodged through. If you attempt to do this, you'll still take the hit. It deals 5 damage, which increases by 7.5 per level. Like the Waste Kerberonix, letting the Frost Kerberonix recover from a stagger will result in an attack. A ring will form around the enemy until a purple wave comes out, which pierces surfaces and once again cannot be dodged through. It deals the same damage as the Frost Kerberonix's previous attack, 5 at base plus 7.5 per level. The Mycomorph's health and points are the same as the Kerberonix type enemies. It's in the second tier of point values and starts with 138 health, increasing by 59 per level. You can deal extra damage by shooting the weak point on its head. Hitting it here will deal 1.3 times the normal damage. This is the smallest weak point multiplier in the game. Despite this, an extra 30% damage still isn't bad. The Mycomorph is a normally stationary enemy that gets around by teleportation rather than walking. If its line of sight with Selene is broken, it will unform and then reform in another location to continue launching its attacks, of which it has 4. The first has a Mycomorph reach into its chest and pull out an egg-like object. It will then throw this on the ground near Selene. The attack doesn't actually do any damage. Instead, it forms an area that dramatically slows down your movement when you're in it. The second attack has a Mycomorph lift up its arm and point it towards Selene. It will then start firing off barrages of homing shots that angle in towards you. If hit, you'll take 9 damage plus 4 per level. The third attack activates when you get close to the Mycomorph. It will arch back and shards will start pouring out of its head and fall around the enemy. These shots will then lift off the ground and rise up into the air before disappearing. Damage is the same as the first attack, 9 at base plus 4 per level. The last attack only happens if you stagger the Mycomorph. Once it recovers from its stagger, it will then grab its chest with both arms and rip it open. A massive barrage of homing shots will shoot out and angle towards Selene. The fact that it lasts so long, coupled with the fact that it homes, will make you want to deal with this enemy before it recovers from a stagger. Like the other attacks, this deals 9 damage plus 4 for each level. I had an interesting time trying to research the Titanops, as I'm 90% sure that you can only encounter this enemy when it's level 2. This is because you don't seem to be able to meet the enemy on the first 10 floors of the tower, and on later floors, they'll swap out this variant for a harder one. Because I only ever encountered level 2 versions of this enemy, I wasn't able to determine the damage increase for its attacks per level. Luckily, this shares health with several other enemies, so I can say that it has 411 health plus 119 added per level. Effectively, this means that it will always have 530 health when you encounter it, since it will always be at level 2. You can attack the weak point on its head, which will triple the damage you deal. When killed, you'll get points for the third tier. Like other enemies, this is another one that can jump up and down cliffs to catch up to Celine. The Titanops likes to focus on close combat for its attacks. First up is a gap closer. The Titanops will punch the ground with their fan-like arm before lunging in with surprising speed to swipe at Celine. If hit, you'll take 29.5 damage. Again, this is the damage at level 2, which I'm pretty sure is the only version you'll ever see. If you get close to the Titanops, it will throw its head back and roar before doing its swipe at Celine with its fan-like arm. This attack deals 23.5 damage. The Titanops' last attack has it jump high into the air before it comes crashing down. As it comes down, it will punch the ground with its tentacle arm, causing red vines to shoot out of the ground around it where it lands. If you're caught within the blast radius, you'll take 29 damage. The Proto-Titanops is a variant that you'll see more often, as it replaces the basic Titanops after Phase 1. It shares the same point tier, weak point damage, and health as the basic variant. Its general behaviors are also the same, with only one notable difference. When staggered, the Proto-Titanops will have a shield formed around them for the duration of the stagger. If you don't remove this shield yourself, it will disappear on its own once the Proto-Titanops starts moving again. All the same attacks for the Titanops are also here for the Proto-Titanops, albeit with higher damage values. All three of those attacks, the melee lunge, close range swipe, and jump attack, deal 22.5 damage and increase by 14 per level. I know that 22.5 is less than all the damage numbers I said for the basic variant. Just keep in mind that those numbers were for the level 2 version of the Titanops. I'm now back to telling you the level 1 damage values, as it was possible to calculate that given I was able to meet this at multiple levels. If you add the damage increase to the base damage, you'll see that the Proto-Titanops deals more damage than the basic Titanops. In addition to those 3 attacks, the Proto-Titanops gets a couple of extra ones too. During the telegraph for the melee lunge, when the Proto-Titanops punches the ground, it will now produce surface-piercing purple waves. As they're purple, this means that you can't dodge through them without taking damage. If hit, it'll deal 20 damage always. It doesn't increase with level, which actually makes it quite weak at higher tower levels. The second new attack is always a follow-up to the jump attack. The Proto-Titanops will punch the ground 3 times with its fan-like arm. Each punch will produce its own purple wave, which once again, pierces surfaces and can't be dodged through. This attack deals 9 damage and increases by 5.5 per level. Trichozoids are among the slowest moving enemies in the game. They tend to stay in one spot, with only small changes to the location. They can't jump or teleport, so you don't need to worry about them sneaking up on you. Health is the same as the Titanops enemies, 411 plus 119 per level. When killed, you get points in the 3rd tier. The Trichozoid gets 2 attacks, which it uses depending on how high its health is. The first attack will be used as long as its health is around 80% or higher. This will have the Trichozoid glow blue while stretching out. It will then collapse back down and release 2 rings of shots. If hit, you'll take 8 damage plus 4 per level. Once the Trichozoid is below about 80% health, the attack it uses will change. It will now glow purple before spinning around and releasing purple bullets in all directions. These are much more annoying due to their ability to bounce off surfaces. The shots also linger quite a while and move very slowly after they make contact with any surface. This usually means that the area around the Trichozoid will likely be littered with purple shots. Don't worry about the purple color, you're still free to dodge through them despite their coloring. If you do get hit, however, damage is the same as the previous attack, 8 plus 4 per level. Automatons will walk towards Celine, firing off a variety of attacks. They once again have 411 health, which increases by 119 per level, just like the last few enemies. Once again, it will award points in the 3rd tier when killed. Its head is a weak point, which deals 1.75 times the damage when shot. First attack has the automaton raise both arms and point them towards Celine as they glow red. They will then start firing off orange shots from both arms in a machine gun-like pattern. The stream lasts a while, and when it's close to finishing, the color of the bullets will change from orange to red. If you're hit by an orange bullet, you'll take 8 damage plus 8 more per level. If you're hit near the end of the attack by a red bullet, you'll instead take 11 damage plus 11 per level. Its second attack has it raise both arms, just like the first, but this time they'll be surrounded by a purplish-bluish light. The automaton will then fire off a shotgun-like blast from each arm. When hit, you'll take 16 damage plus 17 per level. For the next attack, I'm going to group together all the animations for its melee swings. When approached, one of the automaton's arms will glow red as it raises that arm up. It will then swing at Celine with that same arm. Some animations of this attack also have it attack with a red chain. There are actually quite a few variations of this attack, but from what I've seen, they all do the same damage, regardless of the animation or if you're damaged by the arm or the chain. When hit, Celine will take 16 damage, plus 17 per level. Same as the shotgun attack. Next attack has the automaton crouch down and jump high into the air towards Selene, much like the Titan Ops enemies. In addition to the shockwave when it lands, it will also produce a red surface piercing wave. If you're hit by the landing shockwave, you'll take 9 damage plus 9 per level. Getting hit by the red wave instead will do 11 damage plus 12 per level. The automaton's last attack has it raise its left arm and point it towards Selene. The arm will then light up red before it shoots out its chain in an attempt to grab Selene and bring her in. If you get caught in the chain, you can dash out before the actual damaging part of the attack starts. If you don't dash out, the automaton will bring Selene all the way back to where it's standing and punch her to the ground with its right arm. If this happens, you'll take 23 damage plus 23 per level. This is a ton of damage, plus it has the highest growth rate of any attack in the tower. It's easy to dodge out of once you recognize what's happening, and it gives you plenty of time to react. Make sure you're ready to break out of the grab, especially if you don't have any shields. Broken automatons look like automatons, but broken. They're missing everything from below the waist, and many of their pieces are falling apart. The enemy has 138 health, plus 59 per level. When killed, you'll get tier 2 points. Unlike the automaton, the broken automaton doesn't have a weak point. When you encounter the enemy, it will relentlessly crawl towards Selene in an attempt to close the distance. Once their health is low enough, around 60 to 75% I believe, the speed of the broken automaton's crawl will increase. If it gets close enough, you'll see a red circle around the enemy. Stepping into the circle will cause the enemy to faceplant as a red ring forms around them. The broken automaton will then push itself up for a bit before exploding, releasing a red surface piercing wave and destroying itself in the process. If caught in the explosion, you'll take 18 damage plus 18.5 per level. If instead you get hit by the red wave, you'll take 11 damage plus 12 per level. The red wave gets released no matter how the broken automaton is killed, so if you're about to defeat one, be ready to avoid the resulting wave. You won't need to be worried about the explosion though, that only happens if the enemy self-destructs. Also, just like with the drone enemies, letting the automaton self-destruct won't give you any points. Be sure to get the kill yourself whenever possible. With the exception of Algos, the Gorgolith has the most health of all the enemies in the tower, matched only by another enemy coming up in the next section. It has 1620 health, which increases by a massive 486 per level. If killed, the Gorgolith gives points in the second tier. I find this a bit offensive, considering how durable it is and how robust this move pool is. For perspective, this gives the same amount of points as killing a turret or Kerberonix enemy. It has a weak point on the head, although the extra damage seems inconsistent. It most often seems to do around double damage, but for some reason it wasn't giving me a standard increase when I tested. The Gorgolith has a couple unique properties. Shooting it on its shell causes your shots to bounce off and not deal any damage. If you want to hurt it, you'll need to aim for the legs or the head. Once staggered, the Gorgolith will try to run away from Selene for a while. If you continue attacking it for a bit while it's in this state, it will eventually recoil in pain and take an additional 1000 points of damage. You can only do this once per stagger, so you'll need to wait for the stagger gauge to recover before building it back up and reapplying the extra damage. The Gorgolith's first attack has it widen its stance a bit as the holes in its shell glow blue. These holes will then start releasing shots that arc high into the air before coming down in Selene's current position. The attack deals 13 damage, plus 7 per level. The next attack has an orange light form around the tail before 2 prongs on the tail's tip shoot out orange beams. The Gorgolith will move where its tail is pointed, causing the lasers to sweep across in an arc. If hit, you'll take 19 damage, plus 9 per level. The Gorgolith also has a couple attacks it likes to do at close range. If you're near its face, it will briefly shake its head before jutting its face out and opening its mouth. Tentacles will come out of its mouth in an attempt to hit Selene. This deals 15 damage, plus 8 per level. If you aren't directly in front of its face, it may instead start forming a ring around itself before sweeping its tail in a circle. The full animation will last for 2 full turns. Each sweep is also accompanied by a red surface piercing wave. If hit by the tail itself, you'll take the same damage as if hit by the face tentacle, 15 plus 8 per level. If hit by the red wave, you'll take 10 damage, plus 6 per level. The Severed type enemies are some of the hardest in the tower. They have a large pool of attacks that deal high damage, especially when we look at its harder variant. Both variants of the Severed have 411 health, plus 119 per level. When you defeat one, you'll get points in the third tier. Their head is their weak point, although the extra damage changes between this base version and the upcoming variant. For this version, shooting the head will deal 2.5 times the normal damage. The Severed type enemies are capable of walking, but they'll usually teleport around the map after attacking a couple times or after losing sight to Selene. It will do this by pressing its blade arm against the ground prior to disappearing. A red trail will appear from where it disappeared and point towards where it intends to teleport to. Severed type enemies also have a unique property in that they become automatically staggered once they're at half health. No matter how weak the attack, if it puts them at half health, they'll instantly be staggered. For attacks, they have plenty to choose from, with them being divided between its tentacle arm and its blade arm. The tentacle arm attacks tend to focus on long range, while the blade arm attacks tend to be close range. The first attack has its tentacle arm light up red, then release a barrage of shots towards the player. The attack lasts 3 volleys. If hit, Selene will take 14 damage, plus 7 per level. Next attack has the Severed puff out its chest while its tentacle arm glows orange. It'll then launch a large orb which travels slowly in a straight line. As it moves forward, it will leave behind 2 trails of smaller bullets which travel sideways. If you're hit by the larger orb directly, you'll take 13 damage, plus 7 per level. Getting hit by the smaller shots does 12 damage, plus 6 per level. Another attack has its tentacle arm glow purple as it raises it over its head. They'll then point the arm towards Selene and launch a shotgun blast of bullets. It's important to recognize this tell, as once the bullets are launched, they travel very quickly and can be hard to react to. If hit, the attack deals 10 damage, plus 6 per level. The final tentacle arm attack only activates from very close range. The Severed will attempt to grab Selene with his arm in order to start choking her before throwing her down. This attack deals damage over the course of the entire animation, so you'll want to dash out as soon as possible in order to minimize the amount of damage you take. Also, the choking part of the animation pierces your shields. Even if you have a shield from items or other sources, the damage will still go through. Oddly, this choking animation also doesn't impact your adrenaline, so if you take any damage during that part of the animation, your adrenaline won't go down. If it does last the entire animation, you'll take 26 damage, plus 5 per level. The remaining attacks use the blade arm. First up is a slash that the Severed will use from close range. It will raise up its blade arm, then slash inwards towards Selene. This deals 20 damage, plus 10 per level. Next attack has the Severed crouch down, then jump high into the air. It will then quickly fall and strike the ground with its sword arm, producing a blast. A red surface-piercing wave will also be produced from the point of impact. If you're hit by the landing blast, Selene will take 16 damage, plus 8 per level. The red wave deals 20 damage regardless of the enemy's level. Finding a higher level enemy won't change this damage. When you first encounter a Severed, these are all the attacks that it gets. However, once the enemy is staggered, it will unlock 2 more attacks which are both based off the blade arm. Keep in mind that these aren't attacks that it has to use immediately after recovering from a stagger, as is the case with the Mycomorph's homing barrage. Instead, the Severed will now have access to these attacks for the rest of the fight after the first time you stagger it. Also keep in mind that Severed automatically gets staggered once at half health, so the latest the enemy will have access to these next 2 attacks will be at 50% health. The first of these new attacks starts when the Severed teleports. The animation for the teleport is the same as always, but this time the red trail will attach itself to Selene. The Severed will then pop up in close range and do an outward swing. Keep in mind that not all teleports are replaced by this attack. The Severed will still teleport normally without doing this close range melee, it just has the ability to do this one instead. It's easy enough to dodge as long as you keep an eye out for the red trail and see if it's attached to you or not. If you're hit, the attack does the same damage as a regular slash, 20 plus 10 per level. The second attack occurs from medium distance. The Severed's blade arm will glow purple before it slashes twice and launches 2 blade beams at the player. The beams travel a fair distance, so it's possible to hit you even if you run away. If hit, you'll take 10 damage, plus 6 per level. The Frost Severed looks pretty identical to the base Severed, except for the blue coloring versus the base version's red. Its general behavior and health is the same as the base version, and it gives you the same amount of points when defeated. However, the weak point for the Frost Severed only deals double damage this time, instead of the 2.5 times damage of the base version. While its behavior and attack patterns are mostly the same, the damage it deals for the attacks are now different. I'll start by covering the new attack, as it only gets one. The Frost Severed will raise its tentacle arm as it glows orange before pointing it at Selene and launching a frost orb. The area where the orb lands will freeze over for a time, slowing down Selene's movement. Once it does land, the attack and the area of effect doesn't deal any damage. However, the orb itself is capable of hitting Selene if it hasn't touched the ground yet. It does 0 damage at all levels. Even though the damage is 0, this still counts as a hit towards Selene. This means that it will eat up your shields, or reduce your multiplier if you don't have any shields. So the fact that it doesn't deal any damage doesn't mean that you don't have to avoid the attack. All the remaining attacks are the ones shared with the base version. Not only is the damage different, the coloring is also different at times too. I'll point out these changes. The Tentacle Arm's Shot Barrage attack now has a blue light for a tell versus the Severed's red. If hit, you'll take 10 damage, plus 10 per level. The attack where it launches a slow-moving orb now has the arm glow red. If hit by the orb, you'll take 6 damage, plus 7 per level. The smaller shots now deal 5 damage, plus 6 per level. This actually makes the attack weaker than the base versions. The shotgun attack has the same colored tell as before. This time, getting hit will deal 5 damage, plus 6 per level. The base damage might be lower than the Severed's, but the growth is the same, meaning it will do roughly the same damage. The grab attack also looks the same as before. This time, it will deal 31 damage plus 14 per level. The close range blade arm attacks are where the damage increases become very noticeable. The basic slash attack has the same tell as before. The damage is now 18 plus 19 per level. The jump attack also has the same tell. This time, however, the wave that's produced is now purple, meaning that you'll still get hurt if you try to dodge through it. Damage of the initial shockwave blast is 18 plus 19 per level. The purple wave deals 27 damage at all levels. Like the red wave with the base Severed, this damage won't ever increase. The two attacks only available after a stagger are still here for the Frost Severed. Keep in mind that the Frost Severed also gets automatically staggered when at half health. The teleporting melee attack looks the same, and now deals 18 damage plus 19 per level. The Blade Beam tell is also, once again, the same as before. However, you could say that the damage is a little different. The attack doesn't do anything. I don't mean this like the Frost Blast attack, which does 0 damage but still counts as a hit. I mean that the attack can't hit Celine. The blade beams will just go through her without her ever reacting. Even if you try to get in close to get hit by the blade arm itself, you won't take any damage and nothing will happen. I'm sure this is unintended, but it is something to keep in mind. If you recognize the attack coming, you can just stand there and keep attacking the Frost Severed without worry of retaliation. Other than the fact that they fly, there isn't a whole lot that links these enemies together. The health and point values differ within this category, so I'll cover each of those when I get to each enemy. There are 3 types of Machina enemies. They have 138 health, increasing by 59 per level. They belong to the second tier of points, and none of them have a weak point. Machina enemies don't tend to fly around much. They instead move by teleporting around the map to launch their ranged attacks. Each Machina also has a different attack that only activates once it's killed. The attack itself is determined by which Machina you're fighting. The armored Machina only gets one attack while it's alive. It will expand and glow blue before it launches bullets in all directions. These shots don't have any homing and simply cover a wide area due to how many of them are launched. It will only do this attack once before teleporting to a new location to start the whole process over. If hit, you'll take 8 damage plus 7.5 per level. When killed, a barrage of malfunction-causing attacks will home in towards Celine. You'll get a non-permanent malfunction if this hits you. The damage itself is almost 0. It does somewhere between 0 and 1, and the damage doesn't look to increase per level. The Frost Machina has a much more developed move pool. First attack has it expand and glow blue. It will then start launching barrages of shots towards Celine. These shots have light homing, making them angle in towards you. If hit, you'll take 5 damage plus 11 per level. Next attack still has a Frost Machina expand and glow blue, but this time, a tracker beam will extend from the enemy towards Celine. After a few moments, a purple beam will be fired. This is another purple attack that can't be dodged through. This deals 11 damage plus 19 per level. This growth is huge for any enemy, especially a Machina type enemy. Be careful not to get hit by it. For the last attack the Frost Machina can do while still alive, it will once again expand and glow blue. It will then lob 3 shots in Celine's general direction. These will fall towards the ground, and once they make contact, they will release a surface-piercing wave. The first 2 shots will be red, and the last one will be purple. As the last wave is purple, you can't dodge through it without taking any damage. The red waves deal 6 damage plus 8 per level, while the purple waves deal 4 damage plus 8 per level. When defeated, a circle of thin shots will hover in the air for a moment before slowly homing in on Celine. These deal 5 damage plus 11 per level. The Abyssal Machina's first attack will have it expand and glow blue, unsurprisingly. It will then launch a barrage of shots in Celine's direction. These don't have any homing and simply cover a wide area. The Abyssal Machina will launch 3 of these barrages before teleporting somewhere else to do it again. If hit, you'll take 11.5 damage plus 6 per level. The next attack only activates when you hit the Abyssal Machina. Upon it taking damage, they'll release a red surface-piercing wave. There's a cap to how often this attack can be released, so hitting it with high rate of fire weapons, like the Hollow Seeker, won't result in a million waves coming at you. If hit, the attack will deal 11 damage plus 11.5 per level. Once killed, shots will swarm around the area of its death for a moment before scattering in all directions. These will deal 12 damage plus 12 more per level. The Strixia Matriarch may look like a much larger version of the Strixia enemies, but she really doesn't share any other similarities. She's tied with the Gorgolith for the most health. besides Algos of course. She has 1620 health plus 486 per level. When defeated, you'll get points in the second tier. There's a weak point on her back, which is easily revealed after you stagger her. This is another weak point that I can't get consistent damage increases on. It seems to do as much as 28 times the normal damage for shooting her here. Regardless, this is definitely the intended way to deal with her. She has so much health that killing her without exploiting this weak point would take a long time. The Strixia Matriarch's first attack will have her open her mouth and shoot 4 egg-like objects. These will explode on surfaces to turn the surrounding area into fields that slow down Celine's movements. The individual shots look and function just like the Mycomorph's green egg attack. Just like this attack, this version can't hurt you, and only functions to slow you down. The next attack has her mouth light up blue before 4 purple beams appear. The beams will close in on Celine after a moment. As they're purple, dodging through them will still hurt you. Despite that, dodging is still usually the answer, as you can get out of the way before the purple beams get close enough to hurt you. If hit, you'll take 10 damage, plus 9 per level. Once the Strixia Matriarch is at half health, it will be able to use one more attack. It doesn't really have much of a tell, which is okay since it will likely start far away from you, giving you time to react. The attack has 6 streams of shots come out from behind the enemy. These will then angle inwards and home in on Celine. If hit, you'll take 5 damage, plus 3.5 more per level. The Arcanac looks like a larger version of the Aetheract, although again, it doesn't really have much more in common beyond that. It has 411 health, plus 119 per level. When killed, you'll get points in the third tier. First attack will have the Arcanac lean forward a bit as its body glows orange. Its tentacles will also be glowing blue during this. It will then straighten out and fire off a barrage of shots that start going outwards before quickly homing in on Celine. If hit, you'll take 12 damage, plus 6 per level. Next attack has its tentacles glow blue as it reels back. It will then make 2 complete turns while rising through the air and shooting bullets in a circle. This will deal 19 damage, plus 9 per level. If the Arcanac recovers from a stagger, its next attack will be to look down and shake a bit before looking back up and summoning rings of stationary bullets in front of itself. These will then start turning into homing shots and quickly shoot towards Celine, with the transformation occurring on the inner rings first. This does 37.5 damage at all levels, no increase for enemy level. If killed, the Arcanac will drop down to the ground and explode, releasing a barrage of bullets in all directions, as well as red surface-piercing waves. The bullets deal 12 damage, plus 6 per level, while the waves deal 6 damage, plus 7 per level. Despite its name, the Abyssal Arcanac looks very different from the regular Arcanac, and is easily distinguishable. Despite that, it shares the same HP and point values as the regular Arcanac, 411 health, plus 119 per level, and points in the third tier. First attack has them glow orange, and look down before shooting 3 beams. These beams will angle up, causing them to travel across the ground. If hit, you'll take 20 damage, plus 19 per level. Second attack has the Abyssal Arcanac once again glow orange while looking down. This time, it will fire off 6 rings of shots towards Celine, with the last ring being smaller than the others. All of the rings are large enough so that you could position yourself so that they all go around you. If they do hit you, Celine will take 14 damage, plus 12 per level. Next attack is the same telegraph as before. It will look down and glow orange. Once it looks back up, a swarm of malfunction-causing shots will swarm around before homing in on Celine. Aside from causing a non-permanent malfunction, these are also extremely damaging attacks. They'll deal 18 damage, plus 16.5 per level. After recovering from a stagger, the Abyssal Arcanac will glow orange while flying sideways. During this movement, it will lob 5 shots towards the ground, which turn into red surface-piercing waves on contact. If hit, you'll take 41.5 damage, which thankfully doesn't ever increase with the enemy level. These next 2 enemies didn't really fit into any category. They're both non-aggressive, as they don't have any attacks, but they don't really share any similarities beyond that. The Proteron is an obelisk that heals all enemies in the room, besides other Proteron. So long as one is standing, enemies will recover health at a very fast rate. Unless you can one-shot enemies, or your weapon has very high DPS, you'll need to deal with the Proteron before taking on the rest of the room. It has 200 health always. The enemy won't increase its health as you go up the tower. There's a sphere on the top of the enemy which serves as its weak point. Shoot it here to do 3 times the normal damage. When defeated, you'll get points in the second tier. The Pyloid is the only other enemy besides Algos that appears in the tower but can't appear in the base game. When you first encounter one, it will run away from the player for a few moments. After a while, it will start blinking before disappearing entirely. If you manage to kill it before this happens, a portal will appear which takes you to a bonus room, usually for some free items. The portal itself disappears quickly, so you'll still need to hurry even after you kill the Pyloid. It has 100 health, and just like the Proteron, its health will remain constant at all levels. This is the only enemy to belong to the 4th tier points category. Since it only takes 2 melee hits and can't retaliate, it's a good idea to just run up to it and melee it for some nice points. The Pyloid has no weakness, so I can't list the points value in that category. There are some harder variations of previous enemies. These are called Malformed, and affect 4 of the previous enemies. Aside from being a different color, you can tell it's a Malformed enemy by looking at its level. The indicator will now have 2 up arrows next to the number. Affected enemies can be the Kerberonics, the Proto-Titanops, the Frost-Severed, and the Arcanact. Note that a Malformed Frost-Severed is just called a Malformed Severed. Despite this, it is based off the Frost-Severed, and not the regular one. First difference between Malformed enemies and their regular counterparts is health. Malformed enemies all have 953 health, which increases by 170 per level. This is substantially higher than all of the normal versions of these enemies. Weak point damage is the same as the enemy it's based on, assuming they had a weak point. Points for all 4 enemies are in the 3rd tier, which is only a change when looking at the Malformed Kerberonics, as the Noble Kerberonics was the only one with a tier lower. All the other base versions of the enemies were already in the 3rd tier. With one exception that I'll get into later, Malformed enemies can't be staggered. This is a notable difference from the base version, as they all had stagger bars that could be built up. All the attacks do the same damage and have the same growth as if used by its base version. Just note that some attacks have different coloring when the Malformed enemies use them. Malformed enemies have access to all of the base version's attacks, except for a few exceptions, which I'll go over later. The biggest difference when facing a Malformed enemy is the additional effects that accompany them. When encountering one of 8 attacks will start occurring as long as that enemy is still alive. These attacks don't require the Malformed enemy to fire it, they happen on their own, meaning that they'll happen at the same time as the Malformed enemy's normal attacks, having them often overlap. Which effect the Malformed enemy gets is random, although there are some that can't appear on the Malformed Arcanact as it's flying. I was originally planning on discussing the damage of these 8 effects, like I did with all enemy attacks. But as I tested, I noticed that the damage changed between one Malformed enemy and another. It appears that the effect's damage depends on which of the 4 Malformed enemy the attack is attached to. The effect's damage also seems to go up with a Malformed enemy's level. Because this would require me to encounter all combinations of the effects, and at various levels, I decided that testing would be too difficult. Instead, I'll just describe what they all do. The first effect has red rings start forming around the Malformed enemy before they turn into red surface-piercing waves. Next effect has purple fences show up across the field. The color is misleading, as the fences can be dashed through without any problems. It's not like other purple wave or purple beam attacks, which damage you when you attempt to dodge through them. Next effect has a Malformed enemy counter on hit. Anytime they take non-melee damage, a shot will come out of them and head towards Celine. Fourth effect has a red portal appear in midair. The portal will then fire off malfunction-causing shots, which home in towards Celine. Fifth effect has a purple orb which floats in midair. The orb will then spawn 2 beams to the side, which will then close in on Celine. Once again, don't be thrown off by the color. You can dodge through the attack to avoid damage. I find this to be the hardest effect to deal with. There's very little downtime with this attack, so even being able to dodge the attack doesn't leave a lot of room for you to counter. This is especially true as a Malformed enemy has its own attacks that it'll be using, separate from these beams. The sixth effect will have the ground surrounding the enemy start opening up, revealing cracks on the surface. The light escaping these fissures will start to grow stronger before the ground erupts, damaging you if you're within the radius. This is one of the effects that cannot appear on the Malformed Arcanact as it's flying. Seventh effect has purple orbs appear periodically above where Celine is standing. These will shoot down a tracking beam below itself for a while, before turning into a larger, more damaging beam. Like before, feel free to dodge through them, despite the color being purple. Last is an effect where electricity comes out from where the Malformed enemy is standing and shocks the surrounding ground. The ground will then turn to ice, slowing Celine's movements. This effect doesn't hurt Celine at all. Instead, it just causes the ground to slow her down. You don't need to avoid the electricity either, as it's just cosmetic. This is another effect that can only appear on grounded Malformed enemies. It's also unique because this effect is the only one that will never appear on its own. If you find a Malformed enemy with this effect, it will also have one of the other 7. The other 7 effects cannot pair with each other, so if you do find a Malformed enemy with 2 effects, one of them will always be this. This was most of what I had to cover for Malformed enemies, although there is one additional point I'd like to cover for each enemy, due to the fact that you can't stagger them. The normal Kerberonics' weak point is only ever revealed once it's staggered. Because the Malformed Kerberonics can't be staggered, you cannot take advantage of the weak point. Pairing this with the Malformed enemy's much higher health pool means that it will take much longer to take one down. The change for the Malformed Proto-Titanops is actually sort of a good thing. When staggered, the regular Proto-Titanops will get a shield. Because you can't stagger the Malformed Proto-Titanops, the shield will never appear. I want to reiterate that the Malformed Severed is based off the Frost Severed, so its damage will match that enemy. Because Severed enemies have 2 attacks that can only be used once it's staggered, that would normally mean that the Malformed Severed doesn't have access to these attacks. However, the Malformed Severed shares the trait that it will get automatically staggered once it gets down to half health. Once it takes enough damage, you'll see the Malformed Severed flinch, even though there's no stagger bar visible. This does mean that you'll only stagger it once per fight, but this also means that it will have access to its 2 other attacks. Although because it's based off the Frost Severed, it's really only 1 attack. The teleporting melee attack works just fine, but the Blade Beam attack is broken just like it was for the Frost Severed. It won't hurt Selene in any way, no matter how much you try to get hit by it. The base Arcanact uses the Homing Ring attack whenever it recovers from a stagger. This attack won't appear on the Malformed Arcanact, since it won't ever get staggered. Algos is the only boss you'll face in the tower. It has several forms with many attacks, so it's well deserving of its own section. The last floor of each phase, floor 20, will always be a fight against Algos. I won't be discussing how much health it has, as it would have been very difficult for me to find that out since no damage values are shown when attacking it. I want to note that it doesn't function on the same leveling system as other enemies do. Instead, I'm going to discuss it based on which form of Algos you're fighting. The first 3 forms will function differently than the last form, the Algos Infinity form. It has a weak point on its eye. I don't know how much extra damage this does, as once again, the damage values aren't shown. It's a noticeable increase, so you'll want to focus your fire here. When defeated, the points you get depend on which form you defeat. Killing it by shooting its weak point doesn't seem to change this, and I don't even think it's possible to hit it with a melee attack, so the points you see on screen are what you will get, times whatever your multiplier is of course. The first time you defeat Algos, you'll get 1750 points. The second form will get you 3250 points, and the third time is worth 5750 points. Killing Algos for the 4th time will get you 10,750 points, which will be what it gives you every time you fight it from that point forward. This means that defeating it with a max multiplier of 100 will actually net you over 1,000,000 points. This first section is to discuss the first 3 times you fight Algos, for phases 1 through 3. When I discuss damage, it will be how much damage the attack does at the earliest time Algos can use it. For example, most of the attacks I'll discuss can appear in the first form, so I'll tell you how much damage it does, plus how much damage it does extra per additional form. If the attack doesn't appear until the 2nd or 3rd form, I'll discuss how much damage it does on that form, meaning from the form that the attack first appears on. Most attacks have slightly different behavior depending on which form of Algos you're fighting. I'll discuss any differences as I get to each attack so that I only have to cover each one once for this section. It's important to know that these behavior differences trigger once you deplete one of Algos' health bars, but the damage changes are active as soon as you start fighting that form. What I just said sounds confusing, so I'll try to clarify. Damage I state here will be constant during an entire fight with Algos, so if you're fighting form 2, you can just add the damage per additional form of the attack to the base value to know how much damage you'll do. This is true whether you're on the first health bar of that form or the last. I'm pointing this out because forms 2 and 3 of Algos each have 2 or 3 health bars respectively. No matter which health bar you're on, the damage is the same. When I say an attack has slightly different behavior at higher forms, however, those differences are only true at the 2nd and 3rd health bars. Put another way, the first health bar of Algos form 2 or 3 will use the exact same attacks in the exact same pattern as fighting Algos the first time. However, the damage increases I discuss will have already taken effect. Once you get to the next health bars, the new attacks I mentioned will now be active. Finally, note that any damage I discuss here is only valid for forms 1, 2, or 3. The Infinity form calculates damage differently, so I'll go over all the attacks for that form in a separate section. Starting with the first form, the first attack has the eye glow blue as 4 rods appear around Algos' head. They will then fire 3 barrages of shots. The first will be aimed at Selene, the second will be to either side, and the third will be aimed at her again. If used at form 3, Algos will fire additional, slower moving barrages in addition to the normal one, making it harder to dodge. If hit, you'll take 10 damage, plus 1.5 for each higher form. Next attack has the eye glow red, as it looks up and releases shots into the air. These will come down surrounding Algos in all directions as they spiral outwards to cover the arena. They deal 12 damage, plus 1.5 per level. Next up, Algos will fly lower to the ground. Its eye will light up red before releasing a beam along with a barrage of slow-moving bullets, both coming from its eye. While firing, it will turn its body in a complete circle, plus a little more, meaning you'll likely have to dodge the beam twice. Forms 2 and 3 add an additional rotation to the attack. If the beam hits you, you'll take 16 damage, plus 3 per higher form. If the shot hits you, you'll take 13 damage, plus 2 per higher form. The next attack has Algos look to the side of Selene as its eye glows blue. It will then start shooting bullets into the air as it spins around in a complete circle. It will also release shots along the ground while it does this. After a moment, the shots in the air will change color and start falling towards the ground. Form 2 Algos will add an additional rotation to the attack, causing 2 waves of bullets to fall to the ground. The third form of Algos actually doesn't get this attack at all, so you don't have to worry about it. Regardless of if the floating shots hit you when they fall, or the ones along the ground hit you, it will deal the same damage, 12 plus 1.5 per higher form. The next attacks only occur when Algos changes to its perimeter flying phase. Algos always starts in the center of the room, which is where it launches all the attacks I already discussed. It will swap between that phase and flying around the perimeter until you kill it. First up is the same as the very first attack, where it fires 3 barrages of shots. These deal the same damage as before. Next we'll have Algos' eye glow blue as it releases a massive barrage of shots all at once. The pattern that's formed by the barrage is different at higher forms, but it hardly matters since the easiest way to deal with the attack is just to dodge through it. This deals 12 damage, plus 1.5 per higher form. Next up has its eye glow red before it releases 2 streams of bullets towards Celine. These bullets rotate around each other, forming a spiral-like pattern. If used by Form 2 Algos, the attack gets 3 bullet streams, or 5 streams when used by Form 3. It deals 13 damage, plus 2 per higher form. The final attack for Form 1 has its eye glow red before it launches a beam on the ground in front of Celine. It will then sweep this beam forward in an attempt to catch you. Each higher form will add an additional sweep to the attack, meaning you'll have to dodge it up to 3 times if fighting the third form of Algos. If hit, you'll take 16 damage, plus 3 per higher form. Form 2's new attacks start when you deplete the first health bar. After a moment of its screaming in pain, limbs will tear out of Algos' body before resuming its attacks. There are a few new attacks at its disposal for this form. You may have noticed from the footage of Forms 2 and 3 that Algos will at times summon additional eyes which shoot off their own barrages of bullets. It can do this in different patterns, which change depending on if Algos is at the center of the room or flying around the perimeter. I was having trouble understanding which pattern did what damage, so please forgive me as I'm not going to cover the damage for these attacks. Just know that the timing for the summons is such that it will often overlap with Algos' other attacks, making them much harder to dodge. Again, these summoned eyes only start appearing on Forms 2 and 3. The next new attack has Algos lower down as its eye glows red. It will then fire 4 streams of shots that spiral around each other. This deals 15.5 damage at Forms 2, or 17 at Form 3. Starting at Form 2, Algos can now also switch between its centered and perimeter phases by teleporting. If it teleports out of the center and to the perimeter, it will release a blue wave as soon as it teleports. If used by Form 3 Algos, it releases 3 waves instead. If hit, you'll take 27 damage when fighting Form 2, or 31 when fighting Form 3. If Algos instead teleports from the perimeter to the center, it will release a barrage of homing shots. The Form 3 version of this attack behaves mostly the same as Form 2, although there appears to be more homing shots. The attack deals 10 damage at Form 2, or 11 at Form 3. The final new attack for this form is done while Algos is at the perimeter. It will fly down and release a barrage of shots that form a sort of jail around Celine. At Form 2, the attack is largely useless as the bottom part of the jail tends to get caught against the edge of the stage. This means that you can just stand there as the attack goes over your head. Form 3 fixes this as the attack will usually reach low enough to hit you if you're just standing there. Additionally, Form 3 gets an extra layer to the jail on each side of you, meaning you have to dodge more than once. This deals 12 damage at Forms 2, or 13 at Form 3. Once the second health bar is depleted, Algos will once again scream in pain before grabbing the upper shell around its eye and tearing it open, forming these wing-like pieces. This form only gets 2 new attacks. The first happens when it's at the center of the room. It will start off this attack with a particularly aggressive pattern of summoned eye shots, which again, I don't know the exact damage for. It will then fold in its wings as it looks into the air with a glowing red eye. After a moment, it will spread its wings again and homing shots will pour out. This goes on for a while and will overlap with the summoned eye bullets. The homing shots deal 11 damage if you get hit. Remember that I'm not listing damage increases because these attacks only appear on Form 3. The last attack for this section once again occurs once Algos is in the center of the room. Several rings of bullets will circle around Algos. They will then start spreading out above the arena before they simultaneously fall to the ground at the same time. If hit, Celine will take 15 damage. From the 4th time you fight Algos onwards, it will now be in its infinity form. This reverts back to 1 health bar, regardless of how many times you fight it. Its appearance and attack patterns are largely the same as when fighting Form 3, with only a couple of changes to some of its attacks. This also means that any of the attacks which don't appear on Form 3 will also not appear here. The damage calculations are different, so I'll go through the new damage values for each attack, even if it behaves the same otherwise. Note that the base damage that I list here is for the first time you fight the infinity form, meaning it's actually for when you fight Algos on Phase 4 of the tower. The basic 3-shot barrage now deals 30 damage. plus 13 every time you fight Algos after that. The I-beam attack deals 50 damage, plus 21 per encounter. The shots that accompany the beam will now deal 40 damage, plus 16.5 per encounter. The collapsing ceiling attack will deal 35 damage, plus 14 per encounter. The homing barrage attack now replaces the homing shots with homing malfunction shots, meaning you'll now get non-permanent malfunction if it deals damage to Selene. If hit, you'll take 8 damage, plus 5 per encounter. When Algos teleports out of the center of the room in order to change phases, it will now add a barrage of malfunction-causing shots to this as well. These don't seem to home, but they do have the same damage as before, 8 plus 5 per encounter. The blue waves will now deal 70 damage, plus 29 per encounter. The 3 barrage shot it does while flying around the perimeter is the same as the first attack, 30 plus 13 per encounter. The massive shot barrage will deal 35 damage, plus 15 per encounter. The spiraling shot attack now deals 40 damage, plus 16.5 per encounter. The I-beam will deal 50 damage, plus 21 per encounter. The shot gel attack will deal 30 damage, plus 13 per encounter. And finally, the teleportation from perimeter to center will replace the homing shots of the Form 3 Algos with malfunction-causing shots. These once again deal 8 damage plus 5 per level. You probably noticed that the damage growth of the Infinity Form is quite high. Don't let this mislead you. By the time you start fighting the Infinity Form, other enemies in the tower will have already reached level 12. Not to mention, Algos' damage only increases once per phase, or once every 20 floors. By this point in the tower, other enemies will be getting 4 damage increases per phase. For example, this means that a normally small damage increase of 4 for a basic enemy would effectively be equal to a damage increase of 16 for Algos. Because of this, I normally found Algos to be an easier fight than the rest of the tower, even when reaching the Infinity Form. More often than not, it isn't Algos that ends my runs in the tower. That finally wraps up the overview for enemies. I still want to do videos on consumable artifacts and parasites, as well as tower rooms and mechanics. I imagine those should be shorter videos, although I ended up having more to say about weapons and enemies than I originally thought I would, so we'll see what happens. I'll probably post some full playthroughs of the tower between this video and the next, as these types of videos take me quite a long time to make. For now, thanks for watching.